The captured Japanese soldier stared, not at a weapon, but at a can. His American guard had just handed him a U.S. Army ration. According to an Allied translator and interpreter section report archived in the National Archives, his reaction was one of pure documented disbelief. He had been conditioned for this moment, but for brutality, starvation, and execution. His officers had preached that surrender meant disgrace and a barbaric death. Yet here was food, in staggering abundance. Declassified interrogation records quote one such prisoner. Confession: we were told Americans would torture and starve prisoners. I did not believe I would be given white bread, real meat, and coffee. It is confusing. This was his first visceral shock. The second was metabolic. U.S. Army regulations, as outlined by the Provost Marshal General, mandated that prisoners of war receive a diet equal in quantity and quality to that of American garrison troops. This was a systematic policy, not an accident. That diet aimed for over 3,500 calories per day, the official U.S. intelligence handbook on the Japanese military. However, calculates the standard ration for a frontline Imperial soldier at a meager 2,000 calories, often cut by half in the field due to logistical failure. The cognitive dissonance was catastrophic. The prisoner, who had embraced death before dishonor, now faced an unbearable truth. His captors fed him nearly double the calories his own emperor's army could provide. The dishonor, it seemed, had been in the starvation. But how did this documented reversal of fortune, where the prisoner ate better than the free soldier, come to be? And what did it reveal about the true nature of the two warring nations? To understand this incredible breach of expectation, military records and prisoner diaries show we must first grasp the absolute confidence and contempt with which Japan began the war. The Japanese soldier's shock was born from an unshakable doctrine. It's the asterisk, Senjinkan asterisk. The Imperial Army's Field Service Code issued in 1941 was absolute law. It commanded, do not suffer the disgrace of being taken alive. Surrender was not a military setback. It was a spiritual annihilation that shamed one's ancestors. This Bushido ethos, as historian Edward Dray notes, was drilled into every recruit, forging a contempt for any enemy who would choose captivity over death. This ideological arrogance was reinforced by stunning victories from Pearl Harbor to Singapore, which Japanese propaganda framed as the triumph of Yamato spirit over decadent Western materialism. Official leaflets described Americans as soft, individualistic, and psychologically dependent on luxuries. Their lavish supply trains were viewed not as strength, but as a profound weakness, a crutch for a will that would shatter under deprivation. A captured Japanese soldier's diary from Guadalcanal, translated by U.S. intelligence, scoffed, "We endure with our spirit what they solve with their machines. Our hunger purifies." This spiritual confidence was matched by a brutal logistical austerity. The U.S. War Department's 1944 asterisk handbook on Japanese military forces asterisk details the standard field ration. The asterisk haishoku asterisk, a sparse allotment of rice, miso paste, pickled plums, and occasional canned fish or meat. On paper, it provided around 2,300 calories. In the field, as countless after-action reports attest, deliveries failed. Calories plummeted to 1,500 or fewer, leading to widespread malnutrition in Beriberi. Soldiers starved, not just due to Allied interdiction, but because Japan's entire military philosophy prioritized offensive spirit over supply lines. To endure hunger was a point of pride, proof of superior will. The American obsession with ample rations was, to the Japanese command, the hallmark of an inferior, comfort-seeking army. They were convinced that severing those thick supply lines would cause the entire American war machine to collapse from within. Starved of both fuel and morale, while Japanese soldiers starved with pride on islands across the Pacific, convinced of their moral superiority, captured U.S. intelligence reports reveal a growing American awareness of a critical weakness. The initial American challenge was not material, but perceptual. When a rare Japanese soldier was captured in the war's early, brutal years, his indoctrination often manifested as scorn. Allied translator and interpreter section reports document prisoners upon first inspection of rations, the dense cans of meat and vegetables, hardtack biscuits, and packs of cigarettes, reacting with disgust, viewing the unfamiliar rich food as proof of American coarseness. This contempt dovetailed with a profound Allied skepticism on the ground. U.S. Marines and soldiers, forged in the hell of Tarawa and Guadalcanal, had been taught that the Japanese fought to the death. Intelligence on the Bataan Death March and other atrocities created a hostile atmosphere where taking prisoners seemed both futile and morally conflicted. A Marine on Saipan, quoted in a combat interview, captured the chaotic reality. We were told not to expect prisoners. When we got one, nobody had a clue what to do with him. Feeding him was the last thing on our minds. But the 1944 Central Pacific Campaign changed the equation dramatically. The Battle of Saipan alone yielded over 1,000 prisoners, a floodgate opening. Suddenly, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps faced a monumental, unplanned logistical puzzle. How to systematically feed thousands of unexpected POWs while supplying the largest offensive in human history. Field reports from 1944 detail a frantic scramble to standardize POW subsistence, a burden added to supply lines already stretching thousands of miles from San Francisco to newly won atolls. The Japanese perceptual contempt for soft American logistics was about to collide with the emerging, terrifying scale of that very system. But declassified planning documents from the Office of the Provost Marshal General show the U.S. was preparing a systematic, almost clinical response that turned prisoners into intelligence assets. Behind the apparent generosity was a secret, documented American strategy. The United States, while not ratifying the 1929 Geneva Convention, publicly bound itself to its terms. War Department Circular No. 1 issued in January 1942 explicitly ordered compliance, citing Article 11. Prisoners must receive food equal in quantity and quality to that of troops at base camps. This was not mere altruism. It was a calculated, lawful weapon. U.S. intelligence, through the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, ATs, pioneered a systematic approach. They understood that a starved, abused captive clung to his code of silence, but a well-fed, medically treated prisoner, as historian Ulrich Strauss documents, experienced profound psychological dislocation. His indoctrination predicted brutality. Receiving comfort created a cognitive debt exploitable by skilled Nisei interrogators. George I. Nakamura, an ATIS interpreter, later revealed the tactic: the regular meals, the medical care. It created a debt. It was not just kindness. It was a calculated tool to make them talk, to make them feel safe enough to betray. This soft treatment was the velvet glove around the iron fist of intelligence collection. The tool that enabled it was a logistical marvel scorned by the enemy: the ration. While Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal starved on handfuls of moldy rice, the cans they mocked rolled off high-speed production lines in Chicago. Each can of meat and vegetable stew, each pack of biscuits and soluble coffee, was nutritionally balanced, sterilized, and impervious to tropical rot, a triumph of American industrial food science. This abundance was the foundation of the entire strategy. By adhering strictly to the Geneva Standard, the U.S. transformed a logistical burden into a relentless intelligence pipeline. The food was the bait, the interrogation room, the trap, and the yield was monumental: detailed maps, enemy order of battle, technical manuals, and shattered Japanese operational secrecy. The American response was not an emotional reaction, but a clinical, industrial-scale exploitation of a documented enemy cultural weakness. As thousands of Japanese soldiers entered the meticulously documented U.S. POW pipeline, intercepted diaries and interrogation transcripts reveal their worldview beginning to crack. The shock began not at a camp, but in the mud of a frontline shellhole. Capture by American infantry was the most perilous moment, a gauntlet of rage. Survival past that point triggered a disorienting, documented sequence. Hobbled rearward to a makeshift stockade, the prisoner entered a system of bewildering efficiency. According to Provost Marshal General inspection reports, he was catalogued, deloused, inoculated, and issued fresh, clean clothing, his tattered uniform incinerated. This sterile administrative erasure of his martial identity was mere prelude. The true psychological assault was the mess hall. It was here that the abstract policy of garrison rations became a sensory overload. A surviving 1944 camp menu from the archives lists a daily scale that seemed mythical. 20 ounces of fresh white bread, 12 ounces of meat, often beef or pork, 8 ounces of potatoes, fresh vegetables, butter, stewed fruit, coffee, sugar, and 10 cigarettes. This was not a single can scorned in the field. This was a relentless, daily exhibition of abundance served on a metal tray. Interrogation reports capture the spiraling disbelief. A private captured on Peleliu confessed to Addis's officers, "When I was given white bread and meat stew on a metal tray, I believed it must be poisoned, or that I was being fattened for execution. I could not understand it." Others suspected the feast was a temporary show for inspectors. The tension was existential. To eat this food was to accept the catastrophic failure of his indoctrination. It meant the honor of death had been replaced by the shame of being sustained lavishly by the enemy he was taught to despise. With every meal, the documented, sterile efficiency of the American administrative machine dismantled. Calorie by calorie, the very foundation of the Japanese soldiers will. Then, after days or weeks of this consistent, overwhelming abundance, prisoner diaries and intelligence reports document a profound and irreversible shift in perception. The collapse was not of a position, but of a worldview. It happened not in an instant, but over a series of meals, documented in confidential interrogation transcripts and secret diary pages. Suspicion first crumbled into reluctant acceptance as the food, against all expectation, did not poison them. Then came the shock of routine. The concept of seconds, an offer of more than the already massive initial portion, was philosophically incomprehensible. According to camp newsletters and inspector reports, special holiday meals provoked existential crises: Thanksgiving turkey, Christmas ice cream, and even cold American beer. A captured warrant officer at Camp Tracy confided to his diary on Christmas Eve 1944. A passage later translated by T.I.C.: "Tonight we were given a dinner of roast turkey, sweet potatoes, and for dessert, ice cream. I ate until I was full, and then they offered more. I have not known such plenty since my childhood. I feel a confusion that is deeper than shame. The most hardened soldiers broke at the sight of simple fruit." An interrogator. This report from 1945 notes a veteran infantry sergeant from Okinawa weeping silently when handed a fresh orange. A flavor and symbol of peace utterly alien to his years of bitter combat. The physical proof was irrefutable. Official medical reports from camps like McCoy document systematic weight gain, an average of 15 to 20 pounds within 3 months. Beriberi and malnutrition, endemic in their own ranks, vanished. Their bodies, betraying their ideology, grew robust on the enemy's largesse. This forced a devastating comparison. As one prisoner bluntly stated in an interrogation, archived in Addis files, "I am eating better now than I ever did in the Imperial Army. Here the food comes, there it did not." This was the decisive internal surrender. The realization dawned that these materialistic Americans were adhering to a higher, more consistent standard of civilized conduct, the Geneva Code, than their own spiritually pure command, which had left them to starve. This psychological breach was the intelligence windfall. The debt of kindness, strategically cultivated, was now called. Prisoners, their ideological defenses dissolved by protein and sugar, began to talk. They drew detailed maps, explained weapon specs, and revealed unit dispositions. The soft treatment had engineered the ultimate betrayal, not just of military secrets, but of the very belief system that had sent them to war. In the span of a few meals, official intelligence assessments show the entire psychological dynamic of the Pacific Intelligence War had shifted irrevocably. The consequence of full stomachs was a flood of secrets. By late 1944, the Allied translator and interpreter section was running an intelligence factory powered by cooperative prisoners. An internal ATI's memo from 1945 estimated that roughly 70% of POWs became cooperative to varying degrees. After sustained humane treatment, with a significant portion providing high-value tactical data, they pinpointed hidden artillery positions, explained the vulnerabilities of island defenses, and drafted technical manuals for enemy equipment. But cooperation went far beyond the interrogation room. Prisoners began editing their own camp newspaper, the Nippon Times, which critically analyzed the war's course. The ultimate irony, however, was deployed on the front lines. Former POWs, their health restored, volunteered to operate loudspeakers during sieges on Iwo Jima and Okinawa, calling on former comrades to surrender with precise, credible details of the good treatment awaiting them. They wrote surrender leaflets, powerful because they were authenticated by Japanese hands and voices. One such leaflet, archived by U.S. psychological warfare units, simply stated, "I am treated well. I have enough food. The doctors are kind. You can survive this with honor." This was the indoctrination's total collapse. The Imperial Japanese Army Command knew it. A former Kempeitai officer confessed in a post-war U.S. strategic bombing survey interview, "We intercepted leaflets written by our own soldiers in captivity. Descriptions of their food and medical care were more damaging to frontline morale than enemy bombs." It created a silent doubt no officer could answer. The American policy of calculated kindness had engineered a devastating feedback loop. Good treatment bred cooperation, which produced effective propaganda which further undermined the enemy's will to fight, yielding more prisoners to continue the cycle. The Bushido code, broken by bread and beef stew, was now being turned against its architects. The immediate intelligence coup was devastating. But declassified strategic analyses show the impact of this humane policy reached far beyond the wire of the prison camps. The intelligence harvested from well-fed prisoners had immediate, lethal application. For the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, Joint Intelligence Center summaries, informed by cooperative POWs, provided commanders with detailed schematics of Japanese defensive cave networks, assessments of plummeting morale, and insights into the operational patterns of kamikaze units. This was not abstract information. It saved American lives and shortened battles. But the strategic consequence reached far beyond the next beachhead. Washington planners, observing the transformation in the camps, saw a blueprint for the post-war world. A 1944 War Department Civil Affairs Division memo explicitly stated that the successful reorientation of Japanese POWs demonstrates that exposure to democratic principles and humane treatment can affect ideological change. This model must be scaled for the general population post-surrender. The camp system became a laboratory for the denazification and democratization programs being drafted for a defeated Axis. Simultaneously, the American public was being subtly conditioned for this role. Media features, like a seminal 1944 Life magazine photo essay, showed Japanese POWs playing baseball, tending gardens, and studying in well-lit barracks at stateside camps. The narrative was clear. These were not inhuman fanatics, but men capable of change under American stewardship. This shaped a public opinion more receptive to the concept of a humane occupation rather than vengeful extermination. The policy thus achieved a devastating dual effect. In the short term, it weaponized kindness to dismantle the enemy's fighting capacity from within. In the long term, it provided a proven, documented framework for rebuilding a shattered nation in America's image. The Japanese command's greatest fear, the corruption of the Yamato spirit, had been realized, not through brutality, but through a superior, more confident system that could afford to be merciful and shrewd in equal measure. Military historians now document that this policy of calculated humanity did more than win battles. It laid the groundwork for winning the peace. This episode stands as a singular monument to the war-winning power of the arsenal of democracy. As historian David Kennedy notes, American industrial and agricultural capacity was so overwhelming that it could achieve the ultimate luxury, overfeeding its defeated enemy. This was not a side effect of abundance. It was its ultimate expression and weaponization. The strategic adherence to the 1929 Geneva Convention also forged a lasting legal legacy. The demonstrated military and moral benefits of humane treatment provided a powerful case study for diplomats drafting the strengthened 1949 Geneva Conventions. The U.S. had proven, through calculated self-interest, following the rules of war could be a potent force multiplier. Most immediate legacy, however, was in the successful occupation of Japan. Between 1945 and 1946, the United States repatriated roughly 16,000 Japanese POWs. They returned not as emaciated specters of defeat, but as healthy, even heavier, men. Historian John Dower, in Embracing Defeat, observes that these men served as walking evidence that the conquerors would abide by rules, easing the profound terror of surrender. Their first-hand accounts of good treatment dismantled the final remnants of militarist propaganda for the general population, making the work of MacArthur's administration incomparably easier. Scholars like Ulrich Strauss conclude that this was a masterful, if coldly rational, example of strategic psychological warfare. The policy created a devastating contrast etched into the historical record. While the Japanese military's brutal treatment of Allied POWs resulted in post-war tribunals and lasting condemnation, the American approach, rooted in a blend of law, strategy, and overwhelming logistical confidence, forged a legacy of strategic humanitarianism. It demonstrated that, in total war, humanity, when applied with disciplined calculation, could be more subversive and destructive to an enemy ideology than hatred. The Japanese soldiers' indoctrination was designed to withstand horror. It had no defense against relentless documented kindness. So, what is the ultimate documented lesson from this incredible story of canned stew and shattered dogma? The documented lesson is profound. American victory in the Pacific was forged not just on courage and firepower, but on the overwhelming perception-shattering power of its logistical and moral capacity. The 3,500-calorie ration was a psychological weapon as potent as any bomb. The Japanese high command, obsessed with spiritual purity, was intellectually defenseless against an enemy whose strength was quantified in canned goods. Caloric math and strict adherence to international law. This episode fits within a broader, if imperfect, American tradition, viewing the lawful treatment of prisoners not merely as a moral luxury, but as a devastating strategic advantage. The final stark proof is in the physical transformation. Official camp medical reports showed the average Japanese POW in U.S. custody gained 15 to 20 pounds. Meanwhile, the comrade he left behind on Okinawa or Luzon was slowly starving on roughly 1,500 calories of moldy rice. That 2,000-calorie gap was the true, brutal measure of victory. It represented the insurmountable chasm between industrial might and ideological fervor, between a system that sustained life and one that sacrificed it. This story is buried in interrogation reports and supply logs. If you want to discover more untold stories of how logistics and psychology won World War II, subscribe and hit the bell. We dive deep into the archives so you don't have to. Next time, we'll reveal how American engineers performed an even bigger logistical deception, building entire fake armies to fool the Nazis. The story of the Ghost Army is even more incredible than you think, military history proves. Never underestimate a nation that can fight a global war on two fronts and still have enough leftover steak and eggs, too, to convince its enemies they were wrong about everything.